Hello, hi there.
Hi.
Nice to meet you, and lovely to be here. I only discovered your videos about half a year ago on YouTube, and this is my first sort of retreat. I've been meditating for about 2 years. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, so I had a lot of aches and pains to deal with, and I discovered that meditation helped a lot. And while I was looking at your videos, sort of a rain of realizations came over me and washed away a lot of my pains and aches, which was really beautiful. And there was a a disconnecting of, or a sort of outside seeing of the body, and there was the identification sort of fell away. And I find myself doing exercises where I sort of keep on floating around with my attention just for the fun of it, and it feels good. And a question keeps on popping up, which is perhaps only a language thing, but it's what's the relationship between attention and pure consciousness? Are they sort of merged, or is it just one? And am I a little bit confused? I was hoping that you could speak to that for a bit. That would be very helpful.
We could say that attention is consciousness directed towards an object. So the only stuff present in attention is consciousness. But attention is consciousness specifically directed in a particular direction towards some objective experience. So consciousness in the absence of attention is simply a wide open, unfocused or undirected field.
And is the attention then sort of like, I think I've heard you say, resting in itself, in awareness, or?
No, attention is a movement of awareness away from itself towards the object. So the source of attention is awareness, but the destiny of attention is always an object. Try now to pay attention to something that has no objective features.
I've been trying that for a long time, and
you can't
keep on
it.
bouncing around in my head.
If I were to ask you now, pay attention, give your attention to the sensation of your hand on the mic. You as it were, gather your consciousness and direct it towards that sensation. If I were to suggest, pay attention to the buildings outside, you would direct your attention towards the buildings. If I were to suggest, give your attention to what I am saying, you would direct your knowing towards my words. But now if I were to say, direct your attention towards its source, where do you, in which direction do you go?
Clueless.
You can't. Remember, attention comes from two Latin words, tendere, meaning to or towards, and tendere meaning to stretch. So attention is always the stretching of yourself away from yourself towards the object. So there is always attention, there is always a tension in attention. It is always a stretching, a movement from yourself to the object. Now you cannot, so the source of attention is yourself, consciousness, and its destiny is always the object. So you cannot pay attention to yourself.
Does that translate into the body as, well, tension. Like, for example, if you focus too long on something, you get headaches and stuff like that. If I try to turn around my attention and look at myself, I also have all kinds of, how do you say, what? Yeah, constrictions? Or,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Anyone that has tried to pay attention to themselves or find themselves or focus on themselves or find consciousness, as I know most, if not all of you have, at some stage we get very frustrated by that.
I'm there.
But why? Because we can only attend to an object of experience.
Mm-hmm.
We can attend to a thought, an image, a feeling, a perception. But we can't attend to the source of attention for the same reason that the eyes cannot see themselves. They can only see something other than themselves. The only thing we cannot pay attention to is ourself. Mm. In other words, attention has to come to an end in order for consciousness to know itself.
Okay, yeah.
That is why meditation, forms of meditation that require the directing of attention towards an object, are, from this perspective, at best, preliminary exercises to steady the mind. Nothing wrong with that. A mind that is very dispersed may require to be steadied on an object. But if we are paying attention to a mantra, to the breath, to our guru, to the pause between breaths, to our conception of God, whatever it is, if we are paying attention to an object, however subtle that object is, our attention, our consciousness is directing itself away from itself towards that object. So meditation, the highest form of meditation, is the relaxation of attention. It is never the directing of attention, although the directing of attention may, for some people, be a necessary prerequisite. The mind has been paying attention to 10,000 things, and it needs to be given one thing to steady itself on. Steadying itself on one thing will quieten the mind to an extent, and it is then able to begin to sink backwards towards its source. So true meditation is a sinking of the attention, a relaxing of attention, not a focusing of attention. And that is why it is frustrating for the mind, because the mind is always paying attention to something. The mind wants something to do, something to focus on, something it can repeat.
Well, I do kind of help myself with using the word effortless. For some reason, a lot of the constrictions sort of fall away if I sort of contemplate my attention and awareness. But
take the analogy of the sun. If the sun wants to illuminate the moon, it has to direct the rays of its light from itself towards the moon. If it wants to illuminate the earth, it must direct the rays of its light from itself towards the earth. Yes, it directs its light away from itself towards the moon or towards the earth. Yeah. So that's the sun is paying attention, illuminating, shining on an object. Now, what does the sun have to do if it wants to illuminate itself? What does it have to do with the rays of its light or with its attention?
Nothing to do.
No, in fact, if it were to do anything, all the sun could do, if it wants an activity, would be to shine its light away from itself. So as long as the sun is doing something, it is illuminating an object, a planet, but not itself. So if the sun wants to illuminate itself or to know itself, it must cease directing the rays of its light towards another planet and allow the rays of its light to come back to itself. Now that is not a doing, it is the cessation of a doing.
And then you speak of knowing, or...
Yeah, but the sun's illuminating of itself is not something the sun does. The sun illuminates itself by nature. It doesn't have to do something special to illuminate itself. It's by nature it illuminates itself. Consciousness is exactly the same. In order to illuminate something other than itself, such as a thought or a feeling or a perception, consciousness has to do something. It has to direct its attention. But in order to know itself, or in order to illuminate itself, it doesn't have to do something special. Its nature is to know itself. It knows itself simply by being itself. That is why in this approach, meditation is not something we do. It is what we are. Meditation is not an activity of the mind in this approach. It is the nature of the mind.
Here and there, I'm sort of able to understand it when the, let's say, emotional and density of thoughts and emotions are kind of peeled, when I peeled the banana, so to speak. And then other days it's kind of...
Yes. So to begin with, it is necessary to withdraw our attention from objects and allow our attention to gradually, in most cases, occasionally, suddenly sink back towards its source. And for one whose attention is accustomed to being fixed exclusively on objects, this withdrawing of the attention from objects will seem to be something we do. It will seem to be an activity that we are doing. In fact, later we realize that it is the cessation of an activity which we were previously doing, but we didn't realize we were doing it because we were so habituated to it. So this sinking back of the attention, to begin with, seems to be something that we do. In fact, it is something we cease to do. And that is that in the early stages, there seems to be this withdrawal of attention from the objects of experience. And as a result, this tasting or knowing of ourselves as we are. But in time, as we go back with our attention to the objects of experience cease to have the power to veil our knowledge of ourself from ourself. So to begin with, there is this knowing of ourself in the absence of objects, and in time this knowing of ourself remains during the presence of objects or during the presence of experience. In other words, there is no longer this back and forth. It's not either objects or myself, either experience or meditation. It may be, to begin with, simply to counteract the habit of paying attention exclusively to objects. So in the beginning there may be this back and forth, this either or. But in time, experience begins to lose its capacity to veil consciousness. And then there is less and less distinction between meditation and experience. And in fact, the distinction between life and meditation gradually dissolves until we can no longer consider meditation a particular activity that we do amongst numerous other activities. Meditation is the nature of our lives. We cannot, and then we may still choose to sit on our sofa and close our eyes and rest in our being. But when we're bicycling down the streets of Amsterdam, negotiating the trams and the cars coming from all sorts of strange directions, that no longer prevents us from being in meditation.
That would be nice. The only other question that I would follow this with is does this sort of translate within the body as just relaxation? Or
Yes, because the separate self, and the separate self is the belief and the feeling that what I essentially am is temporary and finite. Mm-hmm. So the separate self is not just a belief in the mind. It's not just an emotion. It's also felt in the body. So it's not just that the mind is wound up into a tension or a contraction, but the body is also the belief and feeling of being a separate self also, as it were, winds the body up into a state of contraction. So the extent to which we recognize our true nature, that there is this deep relaxation in both the mind and the body. Now that relaxation sometimes happens, as we said earlier, we could hear a meditation or read something in a book that precipitates this immediate recognition, and there is this, sometimes there can just be this falling away and this immediate kind of burst.
I had a few of those.
You've had, I'm sure, almost everyone, if not everyone, has had that. That may happen, but due to force of habit, the old tensions will almost certainly come back. So in time, there is also a gradual relaxation of this tension, and the gradual relaxation of this tension is in fact more reliable. Because the sudden relaxation of this sudden parting of the clouds, they usually come back pretty quickly.
I've had those experiences as well.
So so many of us have felt the joy of our true nature, only to feel that we've lost it, and that we can't find our way back. So then that's where the sadhana, the spiritual practice, if we can call it that, begins. And then as a result of that, this relaxation then begins to take place more gradually, less spectacular. We may no longer be able to describe it or say, oh, I had this extraordinary experience, but this gradual softening or opening or relaxing is more reliable because it happens slowly, but it tends not to go back. So when we have this first initial glimpse, that's like a kiss from God saying, this is what you can expect. It's like a sample of myself. But now I'm going to disappear and you have to find me now. And that finding, going back to that kiss, that for most of us takes time, and it involves a gradual relaxing and softening and opening, and that takes time. But at least as this relaxation takes place, it tends not to go back. Or if it does go back, it doesn't go back all the way. There is this opening, and then possibly the old habits come back a little bit, but then there is more opening, and the habits come back a little bit, and there is more opening. So it's more reliable, less sensational, but more reliable.
Great, thank you.